The first thing everyone noticed was the coat. Not the little girl holding his hand, not the calm way he crossed the marble lobby, not the invitation sealed with the hotel's own royal crest, but the old dark coat on Adrian Mercer's shoulders, pressed clean, yet worn thin by too many winters. In a room glittering with chandeliers, black gowns, champagne glasses, and million-dollar smiles, he looked like a man who had taken the wrong door into someone else's life. The security director stepped in front of him before he reached the check-in desk, blocking his path as if poverty itself had triggered an alarm. "Private event," the man said loud enough for the lobby to hear. Guests turned. A woman laughed behind her hand. A man in a white tuxedo whispered something cruel. Adrian's 9-year-old daughter Mila squeezed his fingers and whispered, "Bah, we can go home." But Adrian didn't move. He had not entered this hotel in 11 years. He had buried his wife, walked away from an empire, raised his daughter in a small Queens apartment, and kept one secret tucked inside an old leather wallet close to his heart. When the guards came closer, Adrian slowly opened that wallet and placed a matte black titanium card on the marble desk. The tiny click cut through the lobby like a gunshot. The security director's smile vanished. The CEO froze 20 feet away. Because there were only 3 cards like that in existence, and this one belonged to the man who had built the entire Valoria Crown empire. Before midnight, every powerful person inside that building would learn why he had truly come back. But if Adrian owned the hotel, why had someone begged him to return tonight? And what crime had been hidden in his dead wife's name? The first thing people saw when Adrian Mercer stepped into the lobby of the Valoria Crown Manhattan was not his posture, though it was straight and calm, or his daughter's small hand wrapped trustingly around his fingers, or even the cream-colored invitation tucked inside the inner pocket of his old overcoat. What they saw was the coat itself. It was clean, carefully brushed and buttoned, with the quiet dignity of a man who respected every room he entered. But it was old. The cuffs had softened from years of use. The shoulders had lost the sharpness they once had. It was the kind of coat that belonged on a subway platform in Queens, not beneath a chandelier made of Austrian crystal, surrounded by marble columns, velvet ropes, white orchids, and guests whose watches cost more than most people's rent. Adrian noticed the stairs before Mila did. He always noticed things before she did because for 9 years, that had been his job, to read the world quickly, to know which streets felt safe, which voices carried danger, which smiles were kind and which were only masks. Mila was too busy looking upward, her dark eyes wide as she studied the ceiling mural, the gold trim, the long staircase curving toward the ballroom where music drifted like perfume. She wore a navy dress with tiny pearl buttons down the front, bought from a consignment shop 3 weeks earlier after she declared it formal enough for any serious occasion. Her shoes were polished. Her hair was braided neatly because Adrian had learned long ago that love was often hidden in small, repeated acts. Warm eggs before school, fresh orange juice because she hated carton juice, a hand on her shoulder when she had bad dreams, a braid done carefully even when his own eyes were heavy from lack of sleep. To the people in that lobby, he looked like a man who had wandered into the wrong life. To Mila, he was simply Bah. Every morning in their 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, Adrian woke before the alarm, made black coffee, and stood at the kitchen window for 4 silent minutes while the city slowly remembered itself. Their apartment was small, with a narrow hallway, framed drawings taped slightly crooked on the wall, and a heater that knocked in winter like an old man clearing his throat. But it was warm. It was theirs. There were no marble floors, no velvet ropes, no staff trained to smile without meaning it, but there was laughter over burnt toast, homework at the kitchen table, and the quiet rhythm of 2 people who had learned to be enough for each other. Mila knew her father had once worked in a fancy hotel. She had asked him one morning during their question game in the car, the game where she could ask anything and he had to answer honestly. "Did you really work at a big hotel?" she had asked, pretending to look out the window as if the answer did not matter. "A long time ago," Adrian said. Like a very fancy one. Like a very fancy one. Why did you stop? He had paused at a green light, hands steady on the wheel of the old Volvo, and said, "Because some things matter more than fancy." That was all he told her. He did not tell her that the Valoria Crown had once been his dream. He did not tell her that at 23, with more courage than money, he and her mother Celine had sketched the first idea on a diner napkin after midnight. Celine had believed that luxury should never make ordinary people feel small. She used to say a hotel was not truly elegant unless the bellman, the housekeeper, the millionaire, and the tired woman arriving after a delayed flight were all treated as though they mattered equally. Adrian had believed her. He had built the Valoria Crown around that belief, around the radical idea that dignity was not an amenity reserved for those who could afford the presidential suite. Then Celine died on a wet Tuesday morning when a car ran a red light and the whole architecture of Adrian's life collapsed before lunch. 3 weeks after the funeral, the board asked him to step back with soft voices and careful sympathy. They spoke of grief, leadership stability, public confidence, transition. They expected him to fight. Instead, he signed what needed to be signed, sold what could be sold, kept what could never legally be taken from him, and disappeared into Queens with a toddler daughter who still smelled like baby shampoo and slept with her fist curled against his shirt. For 11 years, he kept his past folded away like an expensive suit in a garment bag. Then the invitation arrived. It came in a cream envelope sealed with dark red wax, stamped with a crown above a stylized V. Mila recognized the symbol before he spoke. She had seen it once in his memory box wrapped in blue cloth, beside an old photograph of her mother laughing at something outside the frame. "That's yours, isn't it?" she asked. Adrian held the envelope longer than necessary. "A long time ago," he said. Inside was an invitation to the 25th anniversary celebration of the Valoria Crown collection, and beneath the printed words was a handwritten sentence. "It is time to finish what was started." No signature, no explanation, just that sentence sharp enough to cut through 11 years of silence. Adrian did not sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table after Mila went to bed, the invitation lying beside his untouched coffee, and thought of Celine's handwriting, Celine's laugh, Celine's belief that a beautiful place meant nothing if it forgot how to be kind. He thought of the boardroom where men who owed their careers to her vision had gently pushed him out while pretending to protect him. He thought of the reports he had read quietly over the years, the complaints, the lawsuits settled in silence, the staff turnover, the slow hardening of a company that had once been built like an open hand and now behaved like a closed fist. By morning, he had made his decision. He would go. Not to reclaim a throne, not to humiliate anyone. He would go because Mila deserved to see at least once what her mother had helped create, and because some doors, if left open too long, begin to rot on their hinges. Now standing inside the lobby he had not entered in 11 years, Adrian felt the past rise around him with terrible clarity. He remembered approving the stone under his shoes. He remembered Celine arguing for softer lighting near the entrance because she said first impressions should welcome people, not interrogate them. But the welcome did not come. A man in a fitted black suit stepped into their path with a gold badge pinned to his lapel. Preston Vale, Director of Operations, had the broad shoulders and polished expression of someone who had mistaken authority for importance. His eyes moved quickly over Adrian's coat, Mila's second-hand dress, and the absence of a driver behind them. By the time he smiled, he had already decided who they were. "Good evening," Preston said, his voice smooth enough to sound professional and loud enough to be heard. "This is a private event. Are you on the guest list?" Adrian reached into his pocket and handed him the invitation. Preston examined it with theatrical suspicion, turning it over as if expecting the paper itself to confess. Nearby, a couple paused with champagne glasses in hand. A woman in a silver gown glanced at Adrian's shoes. A man in a white tuxedo leaned toward his companion and whispered something that made her cover a laugh with 2 fingers. Mila's hand tightened slightly. Adrian felt it and kept his face calm. "I'll need to verify this," Preston said. "We've had issues with forged invitations." "Of course," Adrian replied. His voice did not rise. That irritated Preston more than anger would have. He tapped through a tablet, frowning with deliberate slowness. The longer he searched, the more people watched. The lobby began to shift around them, not openly hostile, but expectant, hungry, in the quiet way wealthy rooms can become when they sense someone is about to be embarrassed. "I'm not finding your name on the primary list," Preston announced. "Try the Founders Registry," David said. Preston looked up. For a fraction of a second, uncertainty crossed his face, but pride erased it quickly. "Sir, until your status is confirmed, I'll have to ask you and the child to wait outside." Mila looked up at her father, her face composed, but her eyes asking everything she would not say aloud. Adrian knew that look. It was the look of a child trying to decide whether the world was dangerous. He had spent 9 years trying to delay that knowledge. "We'll wait here," he said. Preston's smile hardened. "That won't be possible." "Then confirm it." The words were quiet, but they landed with more force than a shout. Preston's jaw tightened. He turned his head slightly, and 2 security guards near the marble columns began moving toward them. The guests stopped pretending not to watch. Phones lowered. Conversations died. Mila leaned closer and whispered, "Bah, we can go home." For 1 second, Adrian wanted to say yes. He wanted to take her hand, walk back through the revolving doors, return to Queens, make tea and let this glittering room rot without him. But then he looked around at the hotel he and Celine had built to make people feel seen, and he realized the building had just shown him exactly what it had become. For one breath, Adrian Mercer stood between 2 worlds. The warm, imperfect apartment in Queens where his daughter was safe, and the glittering lobby of the Valoria Crown, Manhattan, where every chandelier, every marble column, every polished surface seemed to ask whether he still belonged to the empire he had created. Preston Vale had already made his decision. To him, Adrian was not a founder, not a father, not a man with a history buried under 11 years of silence. He was an inconvenience in an old coat, a problem to be removed before the important guests noticed too much. The 2 security guards drew closer, their faces professionally blank, their hands relaxed but ready. Around the lobby, conversations had thinned into whispers. The woman in the silver gown lowered her champagne glass. The man in the white tuxedo watched with the faint pleasure of someone expecting humiliation to become entertainment. Mila's fingers trembled inside Adrian's hand. She was trying to be brave, and that hurt him more than Preston's insult ever could. She should not have needed courage to stand in a hotel lobby. She should not have needed to understand at 9 years old that some people measured worth by fabric shoes and the confidence to look expensive. "Bah," she whispered again, softer this time. "Please." Adrian looked down at her. In her eyes, he saw fear, but also trust. She was not asking because she thought he was weak. She was asking because she believed he would always choose peace if peace was possible. For 11 years, he had done exactly that. He had swallowed old betrayals, ignored articles that rewrote his story, signed documents through intermediaries, and let people who had built their fortunes on his wife's vision pretend he had vanished because grief had broken him. He had chosen a quiet life because Mila deserved a childhood untouched by boardrooms, lawsuits, photographers, and men who smiled while sharpening knives beneath conference tables. But this was no longer only about him. This room, this lobby, this living monument to Celine's dream had just taught his daughter a cruel lesson that kindness could be mistaken for weakness, modesty for failure, and dignity for permission to be dismissed. Adrian realized then that walking away would protect Mila from the scene, but it would also leave the lesson intact. It would tell her that when powerful people treated you as though you did not belong, the safest answer was to disappear. His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. "Not yet, Bug," he said. Preston heard him and gave a small, humorless smile. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one final time to step outside." Adrian did not answer immediately. He reached not into the pocket where the invitation rested, but into the breast pocket closest to his heart. From inside, he removed an old brown leather wallet, the edges cracked, the fold worn soft from years of ordinary use. The sight of it drew another flicker of amusement from Preston, as if the wallet confirmed everything he already believed. Then Adrian opened it and withdrew a matte black card no larger than a business card, thick, dark, and strangely heavy in his hand. He placed it on the marble check-in desk. The click was small, but the lobby heard it. Preston's expression changed before he understood why. There was no bank name on the card, no embossed number, no flash of gold or platinum meant to impress waiters and salesmen. There was only a crown above a stylized V, laser-etched into black titanium, and beneath it, a registration sequence so small it forced the eye to come closer. Preston stared at it. His smile held for 1 second too long, then loosened at the corners. He picked up the card with 2 fingers and turned it over. On the back was the founding motto of the Valoria Crown collection, written in Latin, followed by a number that appeared in only one place in the company's internal history, the original charter. Preston had skimmed that document once during executive training and dismissed most of it as ceremonial nonsense, old mythology for brand presentations and anniversary speeches. But now the myth was lying on his desk, carried in the wallet of the man he had just ordered outside. The blood drained slowly from his face. The 2 security guards stopped walking. Someone near the bar whispered, "What is that?" No one answered. 20 feet away, Clara Varelli froze beneath the archway leading to the grand ballroom, a tablet held motionless in her hand. She had been crossing the lobby to handle what she assumed was a guest list error, but the moment she saw the card, the air left her lungs. Unlike Preston, Clara had read the founding documents carefully when she became CEO. She had studied the clauses most executives treated like decorative history. 3 founder cards, 2 surviving, 1 tied to an inalienable 3% stake and a set of rights no board vote could erase. Unrestricted access to every property, full review of financial records, authority to call an emergency shareholder assembly, and if the founding charter had been violated, the power to issue binding directives above the standing executive structure. Clara looked from the card to Adrian's face, and the stories she had heard about the vanished co-founder rearranged themselves into the man standing before her. Not broken, not irrelevant, not gone. Waiting. She crossed the lobby in 12 quick steps. "Mr. Mercer," she said. The name fell into the silence with almost physical weight. Preston turned toward her, his voice thin. "You know this man?" Clara did not look at him. "I know who he is." The guests shifted. A phone rose somewhere near the elevator. The woman who had laughed behind her hand suddenly became fascinated by the floor. Adrian picked up the card and returned it to his wallet with the same calm care with which he had placed it down. He did not gloat. That somehow made Preston look smaller than any insult could have. Adrian turned slightly, looking not just at Preston, but at the room that had watched and waited to see him diminished. "A luxury hotel is not measured by the marble it is built from," he said, his voice steady enough to travel without effort, but by the way it treats every person who walks through the door. No one clapped. No one moved. The words did not ask for applause. They demanded memory. Then Adrian took Mila's hand and followed Clara through the parted lobby toward the private elevators. Only when the doors closed did Mila let out the breath she had been holding. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion, wonder, and the beginning of questions he could no longer delay. "Bah," she said, "do you own this place?" Adrian leaned back against the elevator wall. For a moment, the polished brass doors reflected a man he barely recognized. Older than the founder in the photographs, more tired but not defeated. "Part of it," he said, "a very old part." Clara, standing across from them, lowered her eyes as if to give father and daughter privacy. But Adrian could feel her attention. She had not brought him back for ceremony. The handwritten line in the invitation had not been nostalgia. Something was wrong here, badly wrong, and the lobby had only been the first symptom. On the 42nd floor, Clara escorted them into a private suite overlooking Manhattan. Mila, still shaken, pretended to study the room service menu with fierce concentration, because children sometimes imitate normal life when the world becomes too large. Adrian watched her sit cross-legged on the enormous bed, her polished shoes placed neatly beside her, and felt guilt press against his ribs. He had brought her here to show her a piece of her mother's dream, and instead she had seen that dream turn its face away from them. Clara stood near the window, no longer wearing the public expression of a CEO managing an event. She looked younger now and more exhausted. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not a corporate one, a real one." Adrian removed his coat and laid it over a chair. Preston was doing his job, he said. Poorly. Clara's mouth tightened. What happened downstairs was not an error. It was a culture revealing itself. Adrian looked at her then because that was the first honest sentence he had heard since entering the building. "Why did you send the invitation?" Clara went still. Mila glanced up from the menu, then back down, pretending not to listen. Clara walked to her abandoned tablet, unlocked it, and opened a folder filled with documents whose file names were too carefully organized to be casual. "Because I found irregularities," she said. "In the foundation accounts, vendor contracts, emergency relief disbursements. At first I thought it was mismanagement. Then I realized it was designed." Adrian said nothing. His silence invited the rest. Clara continued, each word costing her more than the last. "The board is compromised. External counsel reports to the chair. Internal audit has been softened, delayed, redirected. I couldn't take this through normal channels because normal channels are the problem." Adrian looked out the window at the city lights, remembering Celine in a diner booth with a stolen pen, saying that a beautiful company without a conscience was just an expensive machine. "Who?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Helena Varelli." Adrian turned back. "Your aunt." Clara nodded. "Chairwoman of the board." The room seemed to cool. Adrian had known Helena years ago as an ambitious strategist with perfect manners and no visible warmth. Celine had never trusted her, though she had tried to be fair. "Do you have proof?" he asked. 6 weeks of it, Clara said. "Shell companies inflated contracts, redirected charitable funds. But there is one account I could not ignore." She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Adrian felt the shape of the blow before it landed. Clara's voice lowered. "The Adrian Mercer Memorial Fund." Mila looked up. Adrian did not move. The name entered the room like a ghost. For 11 years, he had kept Celine alive in small ways, in stories, in recipes, in the way he braided Mila's hair, in the moral architecture he tried to build around their daughter. The fund had been one of the few public things he allowed to remain because it carried Celine's belief that luxury and service should give something back to people who had been denied both. If Helena had touched it, if she had stolen from the very name of the woman who made Valoria worth building, then Adrian's silence was no longer peace. It was permission. He looked at Mila, who was watching him carefully, now old enough to understand that something sacred had been wounded, even if she did not yet know how. Adrian's thinking changed in that moment. He had come to close a door. Instead, he saw that the house behind it was burning. Running from it would not protect Mila. Teaching her how to face it might. He turned back to Clara. "Send everything to my legal team tonight," he said. Clara exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding that breath for 6 weeks. And after that, Adrian reached into his jacket and touched the wallet where the black card rested. After that, he said, "We find out what else this place has forgotten." Adrian Mercer did not return to the ballroom that night. The anniversary celebration continued below him, with music, champagne, and speeches about legacy. But on the 42nd floor, the real legacy of the Valoria Crown was being spread across a glass coffee table in the form of financial ledgers, vendor contracts, foundation records, and internal emails that should never have existed. Clara Varelli sent everything to an encrypted drive, while Adrian stood near the window, his jacket back on, his face unreadable. Mila had fallen asleep on the enormous bed with one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the room service menu folded beside her like a document she intended to review later. Every few minutes, Adrian looked over at her, not because he expected her to wake, but because he needed to remind himself why he had spent 11 years avoiding this world in the first place. Power had gravity. It pulled people toward rooms like this, toward views like this, toward the dangerous belief that distance from ordinary life meant superiority over it. He had walked away so Mila could grow up knowing the sound of neighbors laughing through thin apartment walls, the smell of tomatoes simmering on a Sunday, the dignity of people who did not need marble beneath their feet to stand tall. But now the past had reached into the present and put Celine's name in the hands of thieves. At 1:17 in the morning, Adrian called Lucia Marin, the only attorney from his old life he still trusted. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice rough with sleep until she heard his name. Then the tiredness vanished. "Adrian," she said, "tell me this is not about Valoria." "It is," he replied, "and it's worse than you think." By sunrise, Lucia had assembled a small legal team, not the glossy kind that performed outrage for cameras, but quiet professionals who knew how to read numbers, trace shell companies, and move before powerful people understood they were being hunted. Adrian left the hotel through a private service corridor with Mila still half asleep against his shoulder. Clara had offered a car. He refused. They took the old Volvo from the garage 3 blocks away and drove back to Queens as the city turned pale blue around them. Mila did not ask questions until they were nearly home. "Are we in trouble?" she said from the back seat. Adrian looked at her in the mirror. Her hair was coming loose from its braid, and there was a faint crease on her cheek from the hotel pillow. "No," he said. Then, because he had promised always to answer honestly, he added, "But some people might try to make it feel that way." Mila was quiet for a moment. "Because of the black card. Because of what the black card means." "And what does it mean?" Adrian turned onto their street, where the bodega lights were still on, and a delivery truck blocked half the road as if it owned the morning. "It means I have a responsibility I stopped using." That answer stayed with him for the rest of the day. Responsibility was not the same as revenge. Revenge would have been easy. He could have called reporters, released Preston Vale's name, embarrassed the lobby guests, stormed into the boardroom with the old charter held high like a weapon. But Celine had not built Valoria as a weapon. She had built it as a promise. If Adrian acted now, it had to be clean. It had to be precise. It had to protect the workers, the scholarship students, the emergency relief recipients, and the staff who had kept smiling under managers like Preston because rent was due and children needed shoes. By noon, Clara arrived at the apartment in a plain coat and dark glasses, looking less like a CEO than a woman who had not slept and had finally understood that courage often begins after fear has already won the first round. She brought a second drive, printed copies, and a notebook filled with timelines. Mila opened the door before Adrian could reach it and studied Clara with immediate seriousness. "Are you the hotel lady?" she asked. Clara blinked. "I suppose I am. Do you like pasta?" "Yes." "Good. Ba makes pasta when things are serious." Adrian, standing behind her, almost smiled. For the next 6 hours, the kitchen table became a war room. Clara walked them through the structure Helena had built, a Cayman holding company hidden behind 2 layers of intermediaries, vendor contracts inflated by as much as 40% consulting fees paid to firms with no employees, and foundation grants approved on paper, but quietly redirected before they reached the people they were meant to help. Lucia joined by video call, her expression growing colder with each document. "This is not sloppy greed," she said. "This is architecture." Adrian heard Celine's voice in that word and felt something tighten inside him. Architecture had once meant light, welcome movement, the feeling of entering a room and becoming more yourself. Helena had created a different kind of architecture. Corridors for money to vanish, doors that opened only for the corrupt, walls thick enough to silence anyone who noticed. The first step was to preserve evidence. The second was to notify the proper authorities without giving Helena time to destroy records. The third was to invoke the founder card provision and call an emergency shareholder assembly within 72 hours. Clara hesitated at that. Once you do that, she'll know it's me. Adrian looked at her across the table. She already knows someone is moving against her. The question is whether she thinks you're alone. Clara glanced toward Mila, who was sitting on the living room floor with headphones on, pretending to do homework, while obviously listening to everything. You should have stayed away, Clara said quietly. Maybe, Adrian replied. But I didn't. That evening, the first strike came from Helena. It did not come through lawyers or board channels. It came through the press. At 6:42, Adrian's phone began vibrating on the counter. Lucia called first, then Clara's phone rang. Then messages began appearing from numbers Adrian had not seen in years. A financial gossip site had published a story titled, "Reclusive Valoria Founder Returns Amid Questions About Stability and Motive." The article was elegant poison. It described Adrian as a grieving former executive who had abandoned operational responsibility after his wife's death, questioned whether he was emotionally fit to intervene in company governance, and implied that Clara had manipulated him as part of an internal power struggle against her aunt. There was no direct accusation, nothing careless enough to sue over immediately, only insinuation layered with anonymous board sources. Then came the photograph from the lobby, Adrian in his old coat, Mila beside him, Preston standing before them. But the caption twisted the moment into something ugly, suggesting Adrian had staged a public confrontation to dramatize his return. Adrian read the article once. Clara was pale with anger. "She's trying to make you look unstable before the assembly," she said. "No," Adrian said, setting the phone down. "She's trying to make me react." He had barely finished speaking when Mila appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her headphones were around her neck. "People online are saying mean things," she said. Adrian's stomach dropped. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her. "You saw it," she nodded, trying hard not to cry. "They said you used me." That was the first moment that truly shook him. Not Preston's contempt, not Helena's theft, not the article questioning his mind-grief motives or competence. Those were ordinary cruelties from people protecting money. But Mila's voice, small and wounded, made the room tilt. Adrian had believed he was teaching her not to disappear. Now the world was reaching through a screen to punish her for standing beside him. For a terrible second, he considered stopping. He imagined calling Lucia, canceling the assembly, letting Clara handle what she could, returning the card to the wallet and closing the door again. Maybe peace was still possible if he paid the price quietly enough. But Mila wiped her face with her sleeve and looked at him with Celine's eyes. "It isn't true, right?" she asked. "You didn't bring me there for that." "No," Adrian said, the word breaking out of him with more force than he intended. He softened his voice. "Never. I brought you because your mother helped build that place and you deserve to know that." Mila searched his face, then nodded. "Then don't let them make it true." Adrian went still. "What do you mean? If you stop because they scared you with me, then they did use me." The kitchen became very quiet. Clara looked away, giving him the dignity of not being watched too closely. Adrian rested his hands on his daughter's shoulders and felt with a kind of painful clarity the change happening inside him. For 11 years, he had believed protecting Mila meant keeping her outside the fight. But perhaps protection also meant showing her how truth was defended without becoming cruel, how power could be used without letting it rot the soul, how a person could stand in a hostile room and still refuse to hate. He kissed her forehead. "You're right," he said. Mila exhaled as if she had been waiting for him to catch up. "I know." By midnight, Adrian's legal team had filed preservation notices, secured Clara's documents, and prepared formal notification of the emergency shareholder assembly. Before dawn, evidence packets were delivered to federal investigators and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Adrian also approved one public statement just 3 sentences long. It did not mention Helena. It did not defend his emotions. It did not answer gossip. It simply said that the Valoria Crown had been founded on the principle that dignity was not conditional, that credible evidence of serious financial misconduct had been discovered, and that he would use every right granted under the founding charter to protect the company's employees, guests, and charitable mission. When Clara read it, she said, "That's all." Adrian looked toward Mila's bedroom door where the light was finally off. "That's enough." But Helena was not finished. At 7:03. The next morning, Clara received a message from an unknown number containing only a photograph of the original Adrian Mercer Memorial Fund ledger. A page Clara had never seen before, with one line circled in red. Founding transfer authorized by Adrian Mercer. Beneath it was a sentence that turned the air in the apartment cold. If he opens the books, he opens his own name too. Clara stared at the screen. Lucia on video stopped speaking. Adrian took the phone and looked at the image. For the first time since returning to Valoria, uncertainty crossed his face. Because the signature did look like his. And if Helena had forged his name into the Foundation's earliest records, then this was no longer only about exposing theft. It was about proving that the dead had not been betrayed by the living man who loved her most. The photograph of the ledger sat on Adrian Mercer's kitchen table like a blade no one wanted to touch. For 3 minutes, nobody spoke. Clara Varelli stood beside the sink with her phone still in her hand, the color drained from her face, while Lucia Marin watched through the laptop screen with the hard, motionless focus of a lawyer who had just seen a trap open beneath the floor. Mila was still asleep behind the closed bedroom door, and that small mercy made the silence feel heavier. Adrian stared at the circled line. Founding transfer authorized by Adrian Mercer. Beneath it, the signature looked almost perfect. The slant, the pressure, the clean drop of the final R. It was the kind of imitation that could only have been made by someone with access to old documents, old contracts, old letters from a life Adrian had tried to fold away. Helena had not merely stolen from Celine's memorial fund, she had prepared a way to make it look as if Adrian had opened the door for the theft himself. Clara finally whispered, "I'm sorry." Adrian did not look up. "For what? For bringing this into your home? For bringing it to your daughter's door?" Adrian's eyes remained on the image. 11 years ago, he had believed leaving Valoria was the sacrifice that would protect Mila. Now Valoria had followed him home, slipped under the door, and placed his dead wife's name between his daughter's bedroom and the kitchen where he cooked her breakfast. For the first time since he set the black card on the marble desk, anger rose in him, hot and clean, not the wounded pride of a man insulted in public, but the deeper fury of someone watching the sacred be used as cover for corruption. He wanted to call Helena himself. He wanted to hear her voice when he said he knew. He wanted briefly and terribly to stop being careful. Then Mila's bedroom door creaked open. She appeared in socks and an oversized sleep shirt, hair messy, eyes half awake but already alert to the temperature of the room. "Is it worse?" she asked. Adrian closed the laptop halfway, but not fast enough. Mila saw the image on Clara's phone. She did not understand the numbers, but she understood the faces. Children often read grief before they read words. Did they do something to Mom's fund? Adrian felt the anger inside him change shape. It did not disappear. It became responsibility. He stood cross to her and crouched so they were eye level. "Someone is trying to make the truth harder to find," he said. "Did they lie about you?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Mila's mouth tightened. "Then we find the paper that tells the truth." It was such a simple sentence that Clara had to look away. Adrian almost smiled, not because anything was funny, but because Celine would have said the same thing with more dramatic hand gestures and less patience. By 8 that morning, the apartment was no longer a place to retreat. It had become the center of the fight. Lucia sent a forensic document specialist to Valoria's archive. Clara opened access to internal servers before Helena could lock her out. Adrian called two former executives who had left the company quietly years earlier, people who had once worked directly with Celine and had no love for the board that pushed Adrian out. One of them, an old finance director named Warren Pike, answered from a cabin in Vermont and went silent when Adrian explained what had happened. "I kept copies," Warren said at last. "Not because I was noble, because I was afraid." By noon, Warren had sent scanned records from the fund's original creation board minutes, bank confirmations, donor letters, and a transfer authorization signed not by Adrian, but by Celine herself 3 months before her death. The ledger Helena had sent was not merely misleading, it was altered. The forged page had been inserted later, backdated, and designed to place Adrian's name at the origin point of the theft. Lucia's specialist confirmed inconsistencies in the ink sequencing and digital metadata of the archive scan. Clara found matching access logs showing that Helena's private office had requested the original Foundation ledger 6 months earlier under the pretense of historical review for the anniversary gala. The first wall cracked. Adrian should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the exhaustion of a man realizing how long the lie had been waiting for him. That afternoon, he returned to the Valoria Crown Manhattan without Mila. He asked their neighbor Mrs. Alvarez to stay with her, and Mila agreed only after making him promise to bring back the real paper. He arrived through the front entrance, not the service corridor, wearing the same old overcoat. This time, no one stopped him. Staff members looked up as he crossed the lobby, some with curiosity, some with shame, and some with a quiet hope they were afraid to show too openly. Preston Vale was gone from the desk, suspended pending review, and in his absence, the lobby seemed less polished but more breathable. Clara met Adrian near the elevators. "The staff know something is happening," she said. "Good," Adrian replied. "They should." His transformation was not loud. He did not become a man who enjoyed power. He became a man who stopped apologizing for having it. For years, he had treated authority as something dangerous because he had seen what it did to people like Helena. But now he understood that refusing to use authority could also be dangerous when silence left cruelty in charge. In the archive room beneath the hotel, surrounded by acid-free boxes and climate-controlled shelves, Adrian opened the original founding documents for the first time in 11 years. Celine's handwriting appeared on yellowing drafts, in margin notes, in underlined phrases about dignity access service and the moral obligation of luxury. He touched one page lightly, not with theatrical sorrow, but with the careful tenderness of someone greeting a voice that had waited patiently in paper. Clara stood beside him, uncertain whether to speak. "I thought staying away kept her safe," Adrian said. "Her memory, Mila, all of it. I thought if I didn't let this place touch our life, it couldn't damage what mattered." Clara's voice was quiet. And now Adrian looked at Celine's notes. "Now I think memories don't stay safe because we hide them. They stay safe because we defend what they meant." That evening, Clara called an emergency staff meeting in the grand service hall, not the ballroom. Adrian insisted on it. "If this company is going to remember itself," he said, "it starts where the work happens." Hundreds of employees gathered: housekeepers, cooks, bell staff, drivers, receptionists, maintenance workers, servers, and supervisors who had learned to survive by staying quiet. Adrian stood before them not as a returning king, but as a man who owed them truth. He told them evidence of serious misconduct had been found. He told them an independent review would begin immediately. He told them retaliation would not be tolerated. Then he did something no one expected. He apologized. Not for Helena, not for Preston, not in the empty language of corporate statements, but for his own absence. "I left this company because grief made me believe distance was the same as protection," he said. "But while I was gone, some of you were made to carry the cost of a culture my wife and I built this place to prevent. I cannot undo those years, but I can make sure your voices are heard now." The room did not erupt. It softened. A housekeeper in the third row began to cry silently. A bellman looked down at his shoes. Clara, standing near the wall, understood that this was the moment Valoria began to change. Not when the founder card appeared, not when lawyers filed papers, but when the man with the power to command chose first to take responsibility. After the meeting, employees came forward with stories. Preston humiliating junior staff in front of guests. Helena's office redirecting charitable requests without explanation. Managers burying complaints. Workers being warned that speaking up would cost them shifts, visas, insurance futures. Each story became a thread. Together they formed a net strong enough to hold what Helena had tried to bury. Still, healing did not come without pain. That night, Adrian returned home with a box of copied documents and eyes Mila immediately recognized as tired. She ran to him, and he hugged her longer than usual. "Did you find the real paper?" she asked. Adrian pulled a copy from the box and placed it on the kitchen table. Celine's signature rested at the bottom, unmistakable and alive. Mila touched it with one finger. "That's Mom. That's Mom," Adrian said. Mila nodded solemnly, then looked at him. "Are you still sad?" Adrian considered lying in the gentle way parents sometimes do, but Mila had grown too much in the past few days for soft dishonesty. "Yes," he said, "but not the same way." "What way now?" He sat beside her. "Before it felt like something I had to carry alone. Now it feels like something we can use to fix what broke." Mila leaned against him, and for the first time since the invitation arrived, Adrian did not feel that the past was pulling him backward. It was pushing him forward. The next morning, Lucia confirmed that federal investigators had accepted the expanded evidence packet. Clara secured temporary board protections. Warren agreed to testify. Staff statements began arriving through the anonymous portal faster than anyone expected. Helena's circle was shrinking, but Adrian knew resolution was not the same as victory. There would be hearings, headlines, accusations, and memories reopened in public. He would have to sit across from people who once erased him and prove he had not erased himself. Yet something in him had changed. He was no longer the man who returned only to close a door. He was the man willing to rebuild the threshold so no one else would be turned away from it. At breakfast, Mila watched him crack eggs into a bowl and asked, "When this is over, will you be different?" Adrian thought about the lobby, the archive, the staff hall, Celine's signature, and the black card resting again near his heart. "I hope so," he said, "but not too different." Mila nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I still want eggs." Adrian laughed, then quietly but truly, and the sound filled the small Queen's kitchen with something that felt for the first time in days like the beginning of peace. By the time Adrian Mercer returned to the Valoria Crown Manhattan for the emergency shareholder assembly, the hotel no longer felt like a monument to wealth. It felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Reporters crowded behind barricades outside the limestone entrance, cameras pointed at the revolving doors, where only days earlier Preston Vale had tried to send Adrian and Mila back into the cold. Inside the lobby was quieter than usual. Staff moved with careful purpose. Guests whispered over newspapers, and every polished surface seemed to hold the memory of the black titanium card clicking against marble. Adrian arrived alone this time, wearing the same charcoal suit he had worn on the night everything began, but something in him had changed. He no longer walked like a man visiting a ghost. He walked like a man carrying the living truth of that ghost forward. In his breast pocket beside his heart rested the founder's card. In his briefcase were copies of Celine's original fund authorization, Warren Pike's testimony, forensic reports proving the forged ledger page, internal access logs from Helena Varelli's office, staff statements, vendor records, and a timeline so precise even Helena's most loyal attorneys would struggle to blur it. Clara Varelli met him outside the boardroom. She looked pale but steady, no longer the isolated CEO trying to survive inside her aunt's shadow. "She's already inside," Clara said. "Of course she is," Adrian replied. She always liked entering rooms before the truth did. Clara almost smiled, but the expression faded quickly. "Are you ready?" Adrian looked through the glass wall at the long conference table where the board had once asked him to step away 3 weeks after his wife's funeral. 11 years ago, he had walked out of that room too wounded to understand that silence could be rewritten by the people who remained. Today, he was not returning to reclaim what they had taken. He was returning to stop them from stealing anything else. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm here." When he entered, every conversation stopped. Helena Varelli sat near the head of the table in a white suit, silver hair shaped perfectly, her posture elegant enough to be mistaken for innocence by anyone who did not know better. She looked at Adrian with calm disappointment, as if he were a former employee causing an inconvenience, rather than the one person in the room whose rights no board vote could erase. "Adrian," she said gently, "I wish this could have been handled privately." He placed his briefcase on the table. "So do I. But privacy is where you buried the truth." A few board members shifted in their seats. Helena's eyes cooled. Her attorney began to speak, objecting to procedure, standing, authority, evidentiary standards, and the emotional instability of a grieving founder returning under questionable influence. Adrian let him finish. Then Lucia Moren rose from the opposite side of the table and distributed the first packet. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She walked the board through the original charter, the founder card provisions, Adrian's inalienable stake, and the legal authority by which the assembly had been called. Then came Clara's evidence, the shell companies, the inflated vendor contracts, the redirected emergency relief grants, the fake consulting firms, the fund transfers that passed through 3 accounts before disappearing into entities tied to Helena's private holdings. Helena's face did not change. That was her talent, not innocence, but control. Speculation, she said. A pattern built by a bitter man and an ambitious niece. Adrian opened the final folder. "Then let's remove bitterness and ambition." He slid forward Celine's original authorization page. Her handwriting filled the room more powerfully than any voice. Every margin note, every signature, every correction had been verified. The forged ledger Helena sent had been inserted years later after being accessed by her private office under the Anniversary Archive Review. Warren Pike appeared by secure video, older now, his face lined by years of silence. He testified that Celine had personally structured the fund to prevent board interference, and that Adrian had never authorized the transfer Helena's forged page claimed. Then the forensic specialist explained the ink discrepancy, the altered scan metadata, and the access logs. The trap Helena had prepared for Adrian collapsed in front of the people she had expected to frighten. Her attorney leaned toward her. She ignored him, for the first time. Helena looked directly at Adrian without performance. "You walked away," she said, and now anger cracked through the polish. "You left children in charge of an empire. You left dreamers and hotel poets to pretend conscience could survive growth." "I did what was necessary." Adrian felt the old pain move through him, but it no longer ruled him. "No," he said. "You did what was profitable. Then you called it necessary because that sounds better than theft." Helena stood. "That company survived because people like me understood power." Adrian's voice remained quiet. "This company survived because housekeepers came in sick, cooks missed birthdays, drivers stood in snow, receptionists swallowed insults, and people you never bothered to see kept carrying the promise Celine made long after you betrayed it." The room went still. Outside the boardroom, visible through the glass, 3 federal agents stepped from the elevator. Helena saw them reflected in the window before anyone announced them. For 4 seconds, her composure held. Then it became useless. The agents entered with Clara's authorization and Lucia's coordination, carrying warrants tied to the evidence packets already delivered. Helena said, "This is a mistake," but her voice had lost its command. Adrian looked at her, not with hatred, not even triumph, only the exhaustion of a man watching a long illness finally named. "No," he said, "this is a correction." As Helena was escorted out the hallway beyond the boardroom, filled with stunned employees, executives, and reporters who had been kept at a distance but could feel history breaking through the walls. Preston Vale was not arrested, but his own reckoning came that same afternoon. The internal review revealed years of complaints, staff humiliated in public, guests profiled by appearance, workers threatened for speaking up, and incidents buried to preserve the illusion of flawless service. Adrian insisted his dismissal be announced through the same internal channels staff used every day. Not as spectacle, but as acknowledgement. People who had endured him deserved to know they had not imagined the damage. By evening, the story had spread everywhere. The man in the old coat was no longer a mystery. The black card, the founder's charter, Helena's fraud, Clara's secret invitation, and Celine's stolen fund became a national scandal. Apologies arrived from guests who had whispered in the lobby. Reese Calloway, the man in the white tuxedo, asked whether photographs of him laughing could be cropped from articles. They could not. Adrian read the apologies, answered only the ones that felt sincere, and deleted the rest. Vindication did not taste the way people imagined. It was not sweet. It was heavy. It asked what would be rebuilt after the fire. 3 weeks later, the Valoria Crown collection announced the most sweeping restructuring in its history. Independent oversight replaced Helena's loyal board circle. The Adrian Mercer Memorial Fund was fully audited. Stolen money was recovered where possible, scholarships were restored, and staff across all properties received anonymous channels protected by outside review. Clara remained CEO, no longer because Helena allowed it, but because she had earned the right to lead honestly. The board offered Adrian the chairmanship. He refused. The decision confused the press, disappointed investors, and surprised no one who truly knew him. He agreed only to serve as an informal advisor from Queens on his own schedule, with enough distance to remain himself. On a Sunday evening, Clara came to Adrian's apartment for dinner. There was no champagne tower, no marble, no velvet rope. Just pasta sauce made from actual tomatoes. Mila explaining with great seriousness that octopuses had 3 hearts, and therefore might understand people better than people understood each other. And Adrian moving between stove and table with the quiet ease of a man finally back inside his own life. After dinner, Clara told him she had found Celine's notes in the archive. One line said, Adrian made rooms feel safer simply by being in them. He looked toward the hallway where Mila was pretending not to listen, then toward the window where Queens carried on with its ordinary music traffic, laughter, someone calling from a fire escape, the bodega lights glowing on the corner. She usually saw things clearly, he said. Later that night, Mila sat across from him at the kitchen table and asked if being powerful made people cruel. Adrian thought about Helena Preston, the laughing guests, the silent board, and then about Celine sketching a hotel on a paper placemat with $43 in the bank. No, he said. Power only shows people what they have already chosen to become. Mila considered that, then reached for his hand. You chose us. Adrian held her small fingers and felt the whole story settle into something quieter than victory and stronger than revenge. Every time he said, the black titanium card returned to his old wallet, and the wallet returned to the pocket near his heart. Not as proof that he owned an empire, but as a reminder that love sometimes leaves unfinished work for the living. Adrian still drove Mila to school in the old Volvo. He still made eggs in the morning. He still stood at the kitchen window for 4 minutes while the city remembered itself. But he was different now, not because he had gone back to power, but because he had learned that healing was not the same as hiding. Family was not only the place you ran to when the world became cruel. Sometimes family was the reason you turned around, faced the cruelty, and changed the room so the next person who walked in would not have to stand alone.